I'd like to be a little bit more general than that and to talk about geopolitics more generally. Geopolitics, the relations among especially the major powers, the United States, China, Russia, India, Europe, are at a very difficult and fraught time. And we're in a crisis that is very serious. It's a crisis because we're living in the nuclear age. There are 9 countries that we know of that have nuclear weapons. Maybe some others also do, but 9 that we know of. Most of those 9 are in conflict with at least one other country that has nuclear weapons in geopolitical or diplomatic terms, and in the case of the United States and Russia, in open conflict in Ukraine, because that's actually a war between the US and Russia, and a very dangerous war. So my view is that we need to understand the global scene well so that we avoid terrible, terrible mishaps. And I often refer to the Doomsday Clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. This is a US publication that was started in 1947 after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was started by the atomic scientists who had their journal, and they wanted to tell the world this is very dangerous indeed. And the risks of this new age of nuclear weapons is unprecedented because the power of destruction is something unlike any time before. So they started this clock, and the clock puts the hands of the clock closer or farther from midnight. And when the clock was started, it was 7 minutes from midnight. And the message to the world was, we are close to destruction because of these new weapons. And that was in 1947 when the US alone had the atomic bomb. But then, of course, in 1949, that monopoly was broken by the Soviet Union, which developed its atomic bomb. And then in the 1950s and 1960s by Britain, France, China, and then we know Israel sometime in the 1960s, though never announced exactly, and then India, Pakistan, North Korea. And the clock has gone back and forth depending on geopolitics. It went away from midnight at the end of the Cold War in 1991. The Soviet Union ended. It seemed that there was no more threat, no more Cold War. The US and China were on good relations. The Soviet Union under Gorbachev and then Russia under President Yeltsin said, we just want good relations. We want to rebuild, we want decent relations. So the scientists put the hand of the doomsday clock 17 minutes from midnight. Every US presidency since then has experienced the clock coming closer to midnight. I don't think that's an accident. I think that is the mistake of American foreign policy, which, though the United States is the most secure country in world history in being able to avoid an invasion from outside, because we're not afraid of Canada. We're not afraid of being invaded by Mexico, though there once was a war with Mexico in 1846, but they lost. So this is not a big threat. And we have 2 big oceans. So the US should be very calm. And the only threat that the US faces to its security at all is the possibility of a nuclear war, which should not be hard to avoid. You just have to be cooperative with other nuclear powers. But as I said, from 17 minutes to midnight, Bill Clinton came, it moved closer. George W. Bush Jr. came, it moved closer to midnight. Barack Obama moved closer to midnight. Trump won, moved closer to midnight. Biden, closer to midnight. Now it's 89 seconds to midnight. So less than 1.5 minutes to midnight from 17.5 minutes. What is going on? That every administration is moving the hands closer to midnight. Of course, there are many possible interpretations, but mine centers on the United States and centers on the Western world more generally, by which I mean the US, the European Union, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, if I could add those together, because those are offshoots of Britain as well. And in my view, what is going on is a serious misunderstanding of global reality by the leadership of my country that has persisted now for more than 30 years. You had a wonderful debate, Professor Zhang, with Francis Fukuyama, which I just had the chance to read from 14 years ago. And as you told me, you're right, you won the debate. But the idea of Professor Fukuyama already back in the early 1990s was that the West had triumphed and it was the end of history. And my basic understanding of the reality is something different. And that is that with the end of the Cold War, the world had triumphed in the sense that we had the chance to escape from nuclear war and from confrontation. And we had the chance for rapid economic development in all parts of the world, which China led and China exemplified. So from the 40 years from 1980 to 2020, China experienced the fastest economic development in world history for a large country. And it showed what's possible in our world today because of technology, education, infrastructure, how big an advance can be made. And I watched this, by the way, with my own eyes personally, because my first visit to China was 1981. And so China was not a rich country in 1981. China was very poor in 1981 because of the history of the previous 150 years. And over that 40-year period, which is the period of my professional life, China experienced this rapid development. And my view is that's what's possible in all parts of the world. So while I completely hail China's accomplishment and know that it draws on deep roots of China's history and civilization, I do believe it's something that all regions of the world can accomplish. Maybe not at the same speed, maybe not with all the same success as China, but I do not write off any part of the world, Africa or India or South Asia or Central Asia or Latin America, this idea that we could all live in peace, in mutual prosperity, with rapid economic development in poor countries, I think is the reality of our world in its potential, but obviously not the reality of our world in its actuality. So we need to understand the world as it could be and then aim to achieve that world. Unfortunately, this was not the idea of the United States at the end of 1991 when Professor Fukuyama declared the end of history. The idea was that the Western world would lead the world from now onward, and especially the United States within the Western world would lead the world onward. Whether other regions developed or not was of modest interest, But if they did develop, they needed to develop under the wing of the United States. In other words, what was important at the end of the Cold War was dominance, not cooperation or peace. And this is why I think the world has remained and become more and more dangerous over the last 35 years. So to my understanding, we have a mindset problem. And the mindset problem is that the Western world dominated the world economy and world politics and finance for about 250 years, roughly from 1750 to roughly the year 2000. And during that period, the ideology in the Western world explained that dominance as an inherent rightful feature of the world. And it explained that dominance in a number of different ways, some very extreme, some a little bit less extreme, because there were theories of racial superiority, there were theories of social superiority, there were theories of cultural superiority, there were theories of religious superiority, that this was a Christian world after all. But whichever theory one subscribed to, there were theories of genetic superiority, biological superiority. Whichever view one took, the idea was deeply embedded in the mores, the stories, the beliefs, the institutions, and the politics of the Western world. And two countries dominated most of all, and most of the world's problems today can be traced to them, actually. One was Britain, and China had quite an interesting experience with Britain, starting from 1793 up through probably the end of World War II. And the other has been the United States, which is a successor to Britain in both the Western world and the Anglo-Saxon world.